Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 76. 76 is a pretty clear one, pretty easy one. So I'm going to leave that alone. Just happy birthday, America, I guess, would be 1776. There's a very insane thing we used to do in drama school almost before every class in one particular professor's class. And there were two versions of it. One of them is zip, zap, zop. So it would be a circle, and the pattern had to always be zip, zap, zop. And so you would then go around a circle, point at somebody, and you go zip, and they'd have to reply zap. And then you go zop, zip, zap, zop, zip, zap, zop, zip. And you go around, and then what would inevitably happen is people would foul it up, and there would be a zip, zip, and you'd be out. The second variation of that warm-up game is Donkey Elephant 1776. So Donkey Elephant 1776, Donkey Elephant 17, and then you would eliminate it down to the last person. I was seldom the last person because at the time, and probably even short times these days that I talked about working on, but it's a composure exercise. A lot of what they would say about the exercise is that it's less about composure and more about being in the moment. And that may be true also, that a lot of what that does is it warms up your voice, it keeps you listening because you want to hear the cadence and make sure you don't reply. And I suppose it is all that too. But for me, it is clearly a composure exercise, or at least it was for me when what would often happen to me, and it almost feels like I want to say like an emotional heart attack. Meaning if blockage, when a capillary constricts and blood flow stops, I guess there is a version of that with the nervous system through a nerve. I'd have to ask an actual doctor or physiologist. But in my experiencing lack of composure, or my experience of when things go a little haywire, it is like almost like a capillary constricting, and then flow is blocked. And so zip, zap, zop, if you go zip, zap, zop, and it starts to go faster and faster, and then when it's just two people going back and forth, you start wanting to win, you start wanting to be the last victor. You also know, maybe in this setting, that I'm never the guy who wins. I always make a spectacle of myself with a big fuck after I lose. I also, it was literally strictly for a warm up, so I wasn't going to be graded for it, but it was a very good indicator of where I was at, in terms of my composure, my regulating. And so, a lot of times when I lose my shit, it just feels like I've cut off, blood flow, neurological flow, and I've heard that is some of the training of military and martial arts, and the idea. I knew a dude who was a former Marine, and he would say that they were trained. And again, this is anecdotal, and one dude a long time ago. But he said if he ever got to the point where he would in civilian life have to, like, a bar fight would come up, he said he would just black out. And it would do what it was going to do, and then he would come to and see what the carnage was and see if he came out on top. But he said that's how we were trained, was just to sort of be, placid or black out. And as I hear that story, it sounded kind of good over bar talk, and oh, that's wild, dude. Or like, it's that puffery of like, don't fuck with this guy. I don't think that's as accurate as what really training of that kind of martial art or hand-to-hand or violence. The training of repetition, it's not so much that you black out, it's just that you don't get that, the nerves that would constrict my thinking, my flow, the zip, zap, zop, the tightening up, if you're playing a racket sport, when it gets to match point, things like that, where you tighten up and the mind and the body start to battle. I think the training of punching someone is to break through what Andre Dubus, the second or the third, I think he's the third, he talks about it. It's about breaking, once you break through the membrane that most people spend their entire lives avoiding ever breaking, meaning the membrane of violence, of hitting another human being with intent to hurt, to kill, to have that sphere of social acceptability be pierced. And many of us in modern society have not, so when he talks about blacking out, I think that may be his way of dealing with it or describing it. But I think it's that you kind of get placid, and when you're used to, that's the last guy you want to fight, is a guy who's not nervous to fight, because of their training. And so I guess he's likening that with the blackout. I guess conversely, for me, speaking in public, doing stand-up, things like that, being an actor, that is almost times not any less frightful stepping into it. But I also have done it so much that it doesn't daunt me as much as it could. Although, depending on your level of preparation, you can always be back there where you started in terms of back to that civilian who doesn't want to speak in public. So you have to always be prepared. And I think that's sort of the lesson of any of these human endeavors, is that, and maybe it's an American notion, that you're only as good as your last fight. You're only as good as your last performance. I think that gets blurred into, in my mind, is taking things too personally. I hear something like that and I say, you're only as good as your last performance. And I'm like, okay, so what about Stevie Ray Vaughan? He hasn't had one in years. Like, you know what I mean? Like, was his last one a winner? I'm sure it was. I heard that when they were playing in the Dakotas or Idaho, wherever they were in that fateful day, that apparently he was cooking he was cooking, man. And everybody was basically let him get in the chopper, unfortunately, because no one could deny how good he sounded that weekend or at that festival. So they said, Stevie, you get on and the tragedy ensued. But the notion that you're only as good as your last performance is, I understand that is, don't get complacent, that is always put your best foot forward. But, Yo-Yo Ma, Itzhak Perlman, do they have to, maybe they never have a bad performance, but you don't get to keep any of your esteem from a body of work. You don't get to keep any of your esteem from having been great over decades, So I think, and that the thing that used to always apply to me and why I was always so stressed out doing stand-up was, and maybe it was erroneous and it was always at the core a need to please, I would always say I don't have the luxury of bombing because no one knows who I am. And so every night had to be, that night had to have the ability to, perhaps change my life. So that was a lot of self-imposed pressure because, I have bombed, we all have, and many times I bombed in terrible environments, bar shows that wouldn't turn the TVs off and the crowd had its back to you. I mean, what would have been the point to berate myself for those impossible circumstances? If I had had more composure, and if I weren't torturing myself in those instances, I might have had the composure to use it as a goal setting. Having a little bit more composure also means like how you start your race. How you approach your at bat. I use all these sports analogies, or how each time you step on the ice for figure skating, if we're going to go with Olympics, all that pre race, pre-fight, pre-speech, pre-set, that was where I really could, because if I knew it was going to be a rough crowd, that if I knew there was everything stacked against me, then with some composure and some preparation and getting into a mind state before would be win one person over, make one seat turn around, make one person that you see at the bar watching the game tilt their stool so that you can get one person to say that was not even funny, just to pull focus back. That would have been a test of, do I have the ability to weather the indifference or the outward hostility, all that stuff, to literally turn the tide. And I'm sure I would say that to myself going in, but it often would turn into, and what happens when you are up there on that tightrope, you disintegrate many times into foul language, into hyperbolic phrasing, and then sometimes you just start to cannibalize yourself and you start to pick on yourself, and then the standard, look what I'm doing with my life, all that spiral, and then it's going out over a microphone, out of your mouth. It became a vicious cycle for me. And this has been very helpful, the death session, because if I think there's a balance between best efforts and authenticity, right? So best efforts, the way I was raised, there's sort of a generation gap in my family. So I grew up with a Depression era, World War II kind of do your best, son, and the world will reflect your effort. And I think that was a good thing. So I'm trying to understand how that was difficult, and wasn't difficult. It's hopefully where we can get back to. But once the sort of membrane was broken with the horrors of Vietnam and political unrest, and once all of the sort of true believing got pierced by social unrest and things like that, civil rights, it did make me feel at times incongruous with the sensibilities of where comedy can be at. There's not a lot of positive affirmations that make people laugh. They make people groan. You know what I mean? And so I guess my way of dealing with that in stand-up was to be self-deprecating, because you can't be. I didn't want to present as a cynic, but I also, comedy comes from a certain take, a certain shit talk, a certain sense of the absurdity of life. And if you aren't willing to, and I often wasn't, and I don't know that I am here either, if you aren't willing to comment on the day's events and take a stand, not out of any lack of passion, it's out of wanting more of a broad appeal, mass appeal. And then what you find out is that mass appeal is certainly getting less and less possible, because social media, the minority opinion that used to be in the corner mocking the people trying up on stage. The heckler is one person in a room full of 500. The heckler gets dealt with and usually escorted out or bested by the more in control and the professional comedian. That heckler is now multiplied on social media. So there's no pleasing anybody. And I guess there never was. It was just easier to curate in a funny way, it was easier to curate your life before the internet, because you'd see your friends, you'd see the teacher that liked you, you'd see, there's a comic I used to know, Joe Wilson, I don't know if he's trademarked it, but his whole sort of ethic, or his, I'm sure he'd recoil at it being a hashtag, but he would say everyone is famous to a few people. So the way a stand-up comic sort of, like the great Sebastian Maniscalco, when he starts talking about I was at school pickup, you already know where it's going because you understand his point of view, and that's in a massive scale. But when you're at a dinner party or at a barbecue and Carl D walks in and he says, you know what I had to do to get here? Everybody knows what's coming next in the dinner. It's just the scales, so everyone is famous to a few people, meaning everybody has a take that is either respected, enjoyed, or sometimes it's the take that is the off. We know that and there can be ignominy. Is that the word I'm looking for? Or infamy. If someone's coming to a party that wasn't invited, that the people who all know what that's gonna do to the party or the barbecue, think about that on a massive scale, and then so that heckler, that difficult person, is amplified and often more motivated by social media because of the feedback. And so, the kind of we are no longer enamored or in awe, and it didn't have to be worship as far as artists are concerned. I think it's not important that we really put performers on a pedestal, but when there is objective effort, similarly to, another sports analogy, the 13th guy on a basketball team in the NBA, the guy who never gets into the game, the guy who sits at the end of the bench, is a better basketball player than you or I have ever played with. And sitting there on the bench, and then for back in the day in the crowd, hey, you bum, you scrub, or anybody to challenge that person, or not to at least respect the status or the stature or whatever he had to do to get there. The worst guy on the bench is the best player you ever saw. And we don't give anybody credence. And so even sports talk radio or gossip columns and things like this is to take down people who have achieved in many cases, and then you find out that some of that is also like a manufactured, that's a manufactured industry. Many times, this collusion, they call the paparazzi, say, I'm going out for drinks on Thursday at such and such, come through. And, and that's a publicist's job. And it's a game we all play. And I guess now we can all play it on social media in our own kind of micro delusional ways. And, and that's the debate about whether any of this stuff is good for us or what have you. And like I've always talked about before is the degrading of art, because leisure, not everybody in their leisure time used to engage with art, if you think about it. I spoke with my mom, who's a voracious reader, yesterday, and she passed that on to me. I was fairly voracious, and and she was saying, do you think it's going away, that no one reads anymore? And I said, yeah, of course, I agree. But I think even in the 80s, in the 90s, the fact that I was an avid book reader put me in I can just think of I'm thinking of like a group of 5 people I saw day to day. I always had a book. They never had a book. I mean, so it was always a minority endeavor. It shrinks by what it once was, but it only shrinks in the fact that there's still a small percentage of people who are avid readers. And I think what's happening, if I dare say, people, that group used to kind of run media, the readers, the New Yorker, all that highfalutin stuff. That was what was known as the gatekeepers. And so what's happened with this platform, all these platforms, and they were originally described when they first developed these social media. Certainly Twitter X was described as a micro blog platform. So it was a way to keep gatekeeping out. And so the sensibilities of the readers and the it books and the infinite jest crowd, or what's hip, like that stuff's a little out of step, and maybe rightfully so. But if I push back a little bit, it's that voices that are strictly picking up information out of the ether and out of what comes across their transom without being an avid reader or without being tuned into some of the classics or tuned into some form function, or they don't know what they don't know, and that's fine. And you can't read everything. And so I guess it's the unorthodox, or the having an opinion without any credential has put us where we are today. I guess that's the longest roundabout way to say that, it's not, it shouldn't be a badge of honor that you don't read. But the way we digest media these days, it's really a lot to ask in a way, based on what's available. And I'm trying to push, change my media diet, and that's I don't read the paper anymore, because if I wanted to read a paper a day, but I didn't want to read the same paper a day, there's no a la carte one-off 28 cents, $1 a day as a la carte to buy the paper that day. You have to subscribe. And that was a boon for these media outlets to sort of keep their relevancy. But maybe I don't want to spend all that money, and to get the counter view with a liberal paper and a conservative paper. That's that's a lot of money, when it used to be a newsstand picking up a paper when you had time to kill, or when you were going out for lunch, or when I lived in New York, you'd get the Post, just because it was easier to read on the train, and then maybe you'd get the Sunday Times. And you do that in LA, and you have to spend too much cash or money or whatever, and they're not available, and so it's made things a little different. And then there's paywalls on things you might find interesting, and then you are stuck, myself included, getting news from ungate-kept, untraditional outlets, hearsay, factually untrue stuff. I'm old enough now that I know sometimes I know when the Post is completely wrong. I can fact check based on my knowing something, when and usually it's about pop culture, because that's my wheelhouse. So I'll know more. I'll know right away that my database is idiosyncratic to me, so I'll be able to fact check. But when you're not developing any of that, it's quizzical. So trying to get back onto task about composure and about where it's at for me this week, and trying to figure out the ideas of what's lost, what's gained. I guess, keeping this, part of the reason people, nobody's asking me, I was about to say people ask me all the time. Nobody's asking me shit, okay? Let's be clear, and that's part of being forward presenting. Whether this is not, I wouldn't consider this writing. I would consider this extemporaneous speech, and most of this transcript of these desk sessions would not measure up as an essay, based on, not funneling a thought to refine as a sorry, I got to plug in here because I'm getting a low battery. There you go. Getting a low battery thing, and I'm too far in to start over. And I'm digging what I'm talking about now. No, I'm kidding. But, and that's a good indicator to know what percentage of battery I have left and things like that. So there you go. Taking in some information. But people always ask, that's just the setup to say what you're about to say. But if anyone were to ask me, the times I've written fiction are very limited. The play in New York I wrote was a fictitious amalgam of some events in my life, and they were souped up and exaggerated, and and a whole backdrop of football and injury and all these things were put upon it. So that was fiction, but it was a play. But when I write, or when I'm talking about this one-man show and my book, it's memoir, right? And a lot of the time, people wonder, and so even this, if I tell a story, it's because I can only really be halfway certain that the point of view I'm taking is true, because if I talk about somebody else on this and put thoughts or words in their mouth, then as you can't do fiction when it's first person vlogging, or essay writing. You can do short story, which would then be fiction, but I only do because I might be bringing up a story right now that it's personal, but I guess what I'm hoping comes across is that it's not purely, it may be a percentage narcissistic, but it's really just sort of the stories I feel confident to tell regarding any kind of self-improvement, self-narrative, self-awareness has to come from my self-awareness. Now, I would like to also someday maybe change that, but as the world changes and as writing changes, a novelist is forewalling and world building is a very, very difficult task, very hard to do, and that's why the great writers are praised and venerated, because they are forewalling, and then if to go third person omniscient and to not be first person is a lot. These are sort of atrophied skills, and sometimes it's written so well that I can't tell you my favorite books, whether they're first person or third person or rarely second person, but because it's the experience of reading it and the story it tells. It's not the delivery system is the last thing I think about, but that's the task. But when I do self-referential, if I do a one-man show about myself versus the idea of playing a historical character, I don't know. It just seems to me also I have to clear less fact-checking if I, and I think the misnomer is that it's, I think a memoir, I think you have to be careful. I think defaming is a possibility, and saying something inaccurate is a possibility that you have to ward against. But I think where people get mistaken is that it's not an art form, and that it's just a regurgitation of facts. When really there is a craft to memoir, and I think the onerous or the onus on the writer to be factual is probably there for events, dates, things like that. But I think you can have a proviso of changing names, a blurring certain realities to protect the innocent, the guilty, things like that, which will then not put you in the realm of fiction, but will put you in a less libelous position. And so, and memory is subjective, and people will remember one thing in two different ways. So when it talks about my one-man show, that is why I've chosen it to be, an origin story, first person. A lot of stand-up is, from your perspective, unless you're really doing like just joke. I know Anthony Jeselnik concocts most of that stuff, or a guy like Jimmy Carr will. He's more of a wordsmith, but anybody else is just sort of, this is what I think, and this is what my dad's like, and this is what I said to my girlfriend. That's memoir with jokes, or once you develop that persona like Sebastian, you're off and flying, because everybody, it's the idea of a situation comedy, right? That was you get to know these characters, and then you you drop them into scenarios, and the hilarity will ensue, right? And that's harder to do as a non-famous entity, you know what I mean? But I guess I got some cool stuff in the mail. My brother sent me an amassed pile of, and I think some of them came from my mom's house too. I joke about being, holding on to stuff, and I just had to deal with some construction in my unit, and so I had to pare down, and I guess it becomes a thing, to declutter and all that Maria Kondo shit. And it's come up, but he decided to pass some stuff he had amassed in conjunction with my mom, or just because he had collected it. But it was great to get this stuff that was basically all the playbills and as many reviews as he could find of many of the plays, even all the way back through college and before. And it was, the programs, and it's reminded me, and I guess that's the hindsight thing, and that's why journal keeping, I've done that for a long time. I don't consider journaling writing, but I do use it as a tool, and I fade away when things are, get weird. Sometimes I'm not as disciplined a journal keeper as I always have been, and you'll see these massive gaps. And we've talked about the morning pages, and I told you that the author, I don't think she's missed a day. She might have missed one day. I think she said 1 or 2 days in the hospital. But every day she does her morning pages. But, and she says that a lot of times that I think Mary Carr said her memoir came out of the morning pages. But, to each his own. I'd never found journal keeping very productive to finish products. I never wrote in my journal the things I was thinking about for my play or my book or my and I didn't, maybe I went back to check a date or two, but even the memoir, it's like and this one man show, it's not from my journal, but to receive this sort of I have used it for mental health, I'll tell you that much. And so much of talking about composure, now we're wrapping it up, but much of my lack of composure and need to please and all that stuff, when you see a stack of plays and showcases and equity shows I did in college all the way back to high school, I mean, it's the resume no one gives a shit about as far as IMDb, or your agent doesn't give a shit. And one of the great progresses of an actor's career is you start taking off when you apply to drama school, you have all the plays you did in high school, right? So you're kind of in step with your peers, right? And then when you get to college and you're out of college, you start putting your college credits onto your resume for the profession. And then the day that you have none of those remaining, those apprentice years, if you have none of those credits or job, and then everything on your resume is a job or a TV show, then that is the progress. But just seeing that stuff and reminding myself how far back that's gone, and I will I forget, it's a good reminder. So I definitely thank my brother for sharing that with me and reminding me. I remember a while back, a long time ago, I think it was the Irvine Improv, and I was my buddies brought me down, and I did time in the clubs, but not as much as I would have wanted. I was more of a bar show guy, and then a little road work. But I had a rough time, I guess, or I don't know. Or maybe I was more nervous in the green room before. I just remember my buddy Ryan Sickler saying, "How many times you done this, man?" Like, he was basically reminding me that two things: not to take it each individual set to heart, but also, and that is that going back to, you're only as good as your last set, or you're only as good as your last game. But he's saying the exact opposite, and I guess getting that pile of programs and stuff, that was telling me that, yeah, I was only as good as my last blank, but what a journey. And not to pat myself on the back too much, but like, I really need to really investigate what the hell my nerves were about when, I've been performing since I was, 11 years old. And so if there's something I should be very thrilled to do, or at least very secure in, is my ability to rock the mic, to sing, to dance, to act, to present forwardly. And sadly, like, speaking at a funeral and doing well, I was about to say. That's a comic for you. I did well at the, but speaking at a funeral, but the writing, the presenting, and delivering it without nerves, because it was more sorrow, but also wanting to present well. Like, that should remind me that this is muscle memory that I can rely on. And I've auditioned a million times, and I've had a lot of work, and I do this and I do auditions. And so even at a young age, I had amassed enough road hours. My odometer read, it's a late model version, but a lot of that should have been a confidence born of earned labor, earned skill, earned feeling. And so I guess, I'm not a martial artist, but I am a performing artist. And so I don't know when you get your black belt, but that was a while ago for me. And so that's what I have to take into the new year, the new me, the new, and the lack of confidence, or the idea of always having that job. Right now I'm in between. And so I guess the timing of that mail, and the timing of what I'm thinking these days, and the auditions coming up, and looking back at my work, maybe the new thing for me is to remember who I am, remember what I do. And, and I think that is the turning the new leaf, is using the passage of time as my teacher, not as a thing to fixate on the past, but as a teacher. That many of the things I've worried about, I've kept my head down, and I've kept my head in the game. And so, that's what I'm going to do. And I look forward to doing it now with hopefully some composure and some wind in my sails. And, and then you have to fight, you have to fight the crumbling industry, the lack of care, people saying, pivot or perish. That's hard to swallow for someone who's still like out there in the wilderness. But what can I do? And so I don't use the past to feel bad about, and I can't use the future to feel bad. And I guess that's the new thing, is to try to feel good, and to remember, what we're really here trying to do. And which brings me to, I guess, the end segment that I'm doing. So last week we talked about lessons in love, and this week I'm going to put that in the description, so that you, I guess, will have to go a week ahead to figure out what the song I mentioned in the thing. And because I save it for the end, it's a good way to, if you stick with this video all the way to the end, then you get the next song on this playlist that has been compiled for me. And this is a great one. It's Lovers Rock by Sade. And this is one of, I don't even think it's included on her greatest hits package. And it's got the biggest bottom bass going. It's the kind of song that the bass and the tone, it really does buzz in your earbuds. It buzzes in a subwoofer speaker. It's the kind of thing you'll hear in a car next to you. And I think one of the reasons it's been remade, I think, or the sample has been used 1,000 times on other stuff, but Lovers Rock, and it's I think it's more of a reggae. There's some institutional, Lovers Rock refers to something, an actual thing, but it's also about lovers rock, the rock of a boat. I think it also has to do a little bit with the beat and the tempo, and it's a reggae homage, but with Sade over the top. And it's one of the few mid-tempo to slow-tempo songs that is just like, it picks you up, and it's the coolest track. I mean, it's a track, and it's not her usual sort of refined Morocco, smooth operator. It's not their usual ascot martini. Just sort of, she has that jet set, or I should say they, because Sade is a band that they went with her name, sort of like Blondie was a band, but they were referring to Debbie Harry and maybe the comic strip. I don't know, but and so much to the chagrin of the bandmates, who then sort of did music without their lead singer as Sweetback. And then a lot of people say, yeah, Sweetback is Sade's backup band. They were never really a backup band. They were a band with a great lead singer named Sade. I do. But I really think her name's Helen. I don't know. Something like that. But and much like Leonard Skinner or, Alan Parr, any of these things, they were a unit. But, of course, it's really about her. And so, but, Smooth Operator, Your Love is King, these were sort of, for me, there was I used to live in Soho in New York, and Sade music reminds me of a place called Cafe Noir, which was at the bottom of Thompson Street in Broome, so way down there. And it was a place you could go and drink Red Stripe and get some kind of, they had light bites, but it was an open aired place. It was just, you just felt, and that's one of the beauties of New York, and I guess LA or any city, but like, instead, like, if you wore the right outfit, sure, great, but it was so cool a place that it made you feel cool. It was like you were being there meant you embodied this sort of international Sade, Your Love is King, let me get a red stripe, let me have, and there was always an international vibe. But Lovers Rock is kind of got this, it's got that deep bass, and it's and she's on the like, she's kind of under the track, vocally. And I am in the wilderness, you are in the music. I am in the wilderness, you are in the music of the man's car next to me. So that's the opening line. Lovers Rock, Sade. It's way up there on the list as one of the most listened to ones of mine. And like I said, I love most of Sade's music, or all of it, really. And this is the sort of departure. I forget what album it's from. I think it's from the album Lovers Rock. Stronger Than Pride. A lot of people are only familiar with her greatest hits, but like I was in, if you get the album Stronger Than Pride, Frankie's First Affair. I mean, there's some of the deeper cuts that didn't make the greatest hits are also great songs, and I think Lovers Rock is on that tip. So go check out Lovers Rock. I always used to say that the comp for Sade, before she really sort of stopped recording, the comp for her was Frank Sinatra, and people say, I don't get it, like, he's more that he transcended. He never really did rock. He was always doing that thing, and he appealed to multiple generations over time. And you were just going to buy a Frank Sinatra record regardless of the hits on it. And I think Sade was kind of like that. And they would, she would come back every once in a while, and like, it was always, there's very few people for me that no matter what, before I hear a track, I would buy the album. I'd buy a hard copy of it or a CD, whatever. And so Sade was one of those people, and her timelessness is evidence. Talk about what a Super Bowl show that would be, huh? Imagine Sade at the halftime. Woo! It would be too slick. It'd be too sweet. It'd be too fancy. There's too many. I'm mumbling because I'm just laughing at the whole thing, but Sade doesn't rock a fanny pack. You know what I'm saying? Maybe she does if it's Gucci, but you can't be wearing Crocs at a Sade concert. You need an ascot, a beret. You need to be G'd out, and she's the kind of person in that Cafe Noir in New York, and it's almost like she's your outfit. She cloaks you with her style is so impeccable that it's like you're cloaked in it just by being hip enough to listen to it. And anyway, thanks for this week, and hopefully we got it down to having something to say once in a while. And I guess for me, remember all the hours, remember all your endeavors, and have some composure and rest assured that you have the stuff. So this was the Desk Session 76. Carl D out. Peace.